Hi, my name is Rachel and welcome back to Auxhart Gardening. Today is our week 23 garden tour, and if you stay till the end, I have something brand new in the garden to show you. So for those of you who are new here, I am in South Carolina. This is zone 7B. I'm in the upstate and I have been gardening in my yard since May of this year and in other places before that. But this particular garden was started on May 28th and I've been following it throughout the gardening season in these tours, and I've decided to continue these tours into the winter as things continue growing. And even though it doesn't look as great as it does in the summer, I think it's still really cool to see a fall garden and what it realistically looks like and how things go during the winter in this area. So we actually had our first freeze just a few days ago, and you can tell because all of the summer stuff looks like it died and wilted. A resident garden cat, Kata, inspecting the fallen dead catnip, which actually has one of the most adorable little mushrooms growing out of it. Look at that. What does that smell like, Kata? Does it still smell like catnip? Yeah. So in case you're wondering what frost damaged plants look like, this is it. Usually you can tell the leaves are all looking wilted now that it's warmed up, and they're a little translucent. Every single leaf on the plant looks wilted, although sometimes after a frost, especially a mild one, you might notice that only some of the leaves are damaged and not all of them are damaged. And usually it will be the ones at the top that are damaged and the ones closer to the ground will be looking okay. And that's because the earth holds heat, and so usually the stuff at the top of the plant gets colder than the stuff that's close to the earth, which is still radiating heat long after the air gets cold. Oh, look at her go. She's still rolling in that catnip. So the old tomato side of the garden is looking pretty bare right now. And actually, if you notice, I finally did extend my trellis all the way to the end of the row. And I actually did this at like 5:30 as dark was falling. And so things are not quite straight up and down, but I got everything moved and there was actually no damage to any of the baby fava beans, which I am super, super impressed about. But here's another example of frost damage. You can see the entire plant is wilted, and again the leaves are looking a little like weirdly translucent, like they normally wouldn't be that see-through. And they don't look brown usually just right after the frost. It takes a little while for the plant to actually die. Last year when this was happening, I was really curious about why some plants can survive a frost and others cannot. And so I actually do have a whole video on that explaining why certain plants are able to do really cool things to avoid dying when the frost comes. Because the reason that a plant dies when it frosts is because the water in all of their cells expands, right, when it freezes and bursts the cell walls. And so it's really interesting to learn about why not all plants are affected by that. So right here on the very edge of the garden, I had planted a row of lettuce. Most of those have not come up. However, I am pretty sure that a couple of them have. Here's one. Here is a volunteer sunflower that actually was not fully killed by the frost. And on the other side, yeah, there's another lettuce sprout. However, for the sake of making sure that I have lettuce, I have also started some more seeds in the little cups, and hopefully those will do a little bit better, because planting teeny tiny seeds straight into a garden like this was going to be a little bit of a risk, because if you take a look at the soil, this is pretty chunky, right? This is actually the breaking down mulch that I put on at the beginning of the summer. And so when you're planting little baby seeds in stuff like this, even if you clear a little spot where it's just dirt, like the next wind that comes along and blows something on top of it might be enough to weigh down the little baby sprout. And so you do have to be a little bit careful when direct seeding teeny tiny seeds into the garden, which is part of why carrots are so hard. So right after the frost, I had to come through. I did not get time right before to pull all of the peppers off of my plants. And I was actually very lucky in that a lot of this foliage actually protected the peppers that were on the plants from freezing and going to mush. That didn't work for all of them, sadly, but I did get a fair number of peppers off of these plants right after the frost, and they have continued to die back as the second and third night of below freezing temperatures have come through. Here's a good example of a frost damaged pepper. If you look, it is squishy on this side as opposed to over here where it's a little more firm. And it's squishy now because it froze, the cells popped and lost their structure, and then it warmed up and melted. And so that's a pretty sure sign of that frost damage. It also has a little bit of that translucent look that frost damaged leaves have. And so with something like this, you could save it if you came and got it right away. Maybe you could cut it up and dehydrate it and use it the way you would any other frozen pepper. Like if you take it straight in the morning after it's been frozen and put it directly in your freezer, then that could also work. But if you get it after it has kind of soggied up and sat around in the sun for a while, it is not gonna be super tasty and edible. And I don't know if you can see the little drops of moisture inside, but there's a good chance that it will start to mold pretty quickly. You can also see coming up in different areas, right next to the kohlrabi that I planted here is a little radish sprout, and there's another one on the other side. And thankfully they've got pretty iconic baby leaves compared to some of the other weeds that I am consistently pulling out. But I have seeded these randomly all over the garden because A, radishes grow fast, and B, they're supposed to help repel pests. And more specifically, when they go to seed in the spring, they're supposed to help repel pests. But I had a lot of radish seeds and I was like, well, they're gonna grow really fast and I don't have the effort to like make sure they go in nice little rows. So I just kind of sprinkled them around, and they will, again, they'll grow up fast enough that chances are good that they're not gonna really outcompete anything for nutrients. And if they do, I don't care so much and I can just pull them. But it'll be really interesting to see how this methodology works out. It's a mixture of intentional and lazy gardening. Looks like I forgot to pull my ginger in time for the frost, and that's a little sad. However, the ginger root under there is going to be just fine. It's still going to be perfectly usable, even though the tops are dying back and not looking so great. Last week, where there was gorgeous eggplant, there is now just dead leaves. It is time for these to come out. It is a little past time, to be honest, and I can finally plant out the rest of the brassicas that I've had kind of in the waiting room into this area. So hopefully I will be able to have the time to get this done ASAP. And after watching the progression of these eggplants over the last few weeks, I have some thoughts on the decision that I made to leave them rather than pulling them out early in order to make room for the brassicas. So I don't fully regret that decision because it did give some of the baby eggplants on these plants time to at least partially mature, and a few of them did manage to make it to full maturity. But something that I didn't think about was the fact that everything is maturing so much more slowly in this colder weather. And so I think that the amount of eggplant that I thought I was going to lose was actually not as much as I expected, because the eggplant were never going to have the time to fully mature. And so if I had taken them out maybe a couple of weeks ago and went ahead and planted my brassicas, even though they hadn't yet fully died, I think that the amount of loss would have been pretty minimal, and I would have ended up harvesting a bunch of baby eggplants, which is what I did anyway. So if you're watching this video and considering what you want to do in your own garden, my advice, and probably the gut-wrenching decision I'm gonna make for my garden going forward, is to pull stuff a little bit earlier than this. Here's one that I actually missed the other day when I was trying to gather all of them. This was right there on the ground, so it actually doesn't appear to have any frost damage. But this is the average size of eggplants that I got off of the plants the other day, right after the frost. And it's not so bad, and it's really quite an edible size. This is what the same variety of eggplant looks like, but frost damaged. You can see the skin is no longer got that real gloss to it, and the whole thing has gone a little squishy. So this is going straight in the compost. Plants that were resistant to the frost, like this cilantro, look really great. This is actually kind of perfect weather for cilantro. If you try and grow it during the summer, you will find that it goes straight to seed and the leaves don't taste very good. This fall and the early spring are really the best times to be growing cilantro, which is really disappointing if you're growing cilantro to go in salsa, which requires all of the things that you harvest in the summer. And so one of my goals for this winter is to figure out how to properly preserve my cilantro to be able to shove into salsa when everything else is coming fresh out of the garden. My little row of brassicas has slowed down in growth a little bit, but is still looking pretty great. None of them have died, although some of them are still much smaller than others. You can barely see this little one, but then if you look one down the row, there's this guy. So they're doing vastly different, and I don't know if that's a variety thing or just the positioning, but they will soon have a lot more space to grow, and I probably have enough extra that I can replace any of the ones that look sick, like maybe this one, with healthier looking plants. Here at the root vegetable patch, it is becoming very clear what is doing well and what is not. I do have some carrot sprouts. They're just ridiculously hard to see until they get much bigger. I did actually reseed a fair bit of this, but we'll see if anything actually comes up, because I don't have the ability to come out here every single day and mist them and keep them nice and damp the way that they should be. And I cannot really cover with cardboard because of all of the little sprouts that are already here. So I don't know, I put a lot of seeds and we'll see if anything coms up. But these rutabagas actually are doing pretty well. These are the ones that I started early indoors. And then there's a couple others down here that have sprouted that I started from seed. But I'm pretty sure that these are the only ones that are going to be able to get big enough to actually harvest a big rutabaga from. If you didn't know, with root vegetables, they actually need that coldness in order to make their big root. Because these plants, what they're doing is they're storing energy. And when it starts getting cold, they're like, oh no, gotta store all my energy in my root. And that's how you get a really big, delicious root. Because if you grow it in an environment where it doesn't feel like it needs to sequester that energy, it will be stringy and tough because it's getting plenty of nutrients from everywhere, and it doesn't feel that stress or that pressure to save up. Now, if you look at the green beans from a step back, you might not notice that they're frost damaged, but if you come in close, you can see that the leaves are not very happy looking. Not all of them are dead, like this one looks fine. But a lot of the green beans, I don't know if you can see how translucent that is. I'm not sure these are gonna get any bigger, and I'm not sure if they did, if they would be edible. So I'm probably done with these green beans. They did what they were supposed to do. I got like maybe 6 meals of green beans out of them, and that's not just meals for one person, that's like total meals out of this setup, which I think is pretty good and is more than I would have gotten if I had just stuck with the green beans that I had planted earlier in the summer. And so far, I don't have any plans for what goes on this trellis next. On this other arched trellis, I do have peas planted already, but I think that that will be plenty of peas for me for the season. So if you have ideas on what I can grow on this trellis, I am all ears, because I would hate for it to sit empty, but I do not want to repeat the green bean situation with peas, just because I have a whole nother trellis to fill. Speaking of the trellis full of peas, this very dead looking trellis is going to be full of life again very soon when these peas start growing up. And looking at the way that this is winding around all the dead stuff, it looks like it's about time for me to take all of that and get it out of the way before it becomes hopelessly entangled with the dead stuff forever and I have to leave it all. But I'm gonna have very long telephone peas and sugar magnolia peas coming up this trellis. It is actually pretty difficult to find some that would grow tall enough to warrant having such a beautiful arched trellis, because everybody wants dwarf varieties these days. But peas so far were the only like edible thing I could find that would need an arched trellis, you know? So again, if you have suggestions, I would love to hear them. Alright, so we're at the far side of the garden now, and you can see this double row of brassicas. These are the Brussels sprouts and the cauliflower that I bought from the botanical garden as starts, and these are looking actually fantastic. These marigolds also look gorgeous, even though it's very obvious that the plant is dying. It was not frost hardy, but it'll be a little bit before the blooms fully die, so it gets to pretend like it's alive for a little bit. And you can see, maybe you can see, I have spread some compost in this area, kind of top dressed. I had some left over from my other project that I'm about to show you, and so we took a couple wheelbarrows of it over here and just kind of spread it around over the top of everything. Not very ceremoniously. We didn't pull back the mulch. The mulch was mostly breaking down anyway, and this area gets covered in leaves again pretty quickly. So I'm thinking that this end is gonna grow a lot faster than this end, because I only had enough compost to go maybe to like right here-ish. So that'll be an interesting experiment to see how much this compost is gonna actually affect these plants. Because right now they all look very similar, and they all look very similar levels of healthy. And I'm really optimistic that I'm gonna get harvests from these plants. For anyone who's curious, this is the state of everything that I haven't planted out yet. It is not dying, but it is certainly not thriving. They have stayed the same size pretty much this whole time. They got to this size and then they stopped, and it's probably just a nutrient and pot size issue. But like I said, now that the eggplant are coming out, I can start putting these out and hope that they have time to grow. So if we come over and check on the raised bed, I finally have my little cilantro sprouts that I've been waiting on. It was just that they were slow. Nothing else went wrong. They took a long time to sprout, which should be expected when it's this cold, but I was getting a little nervous, and so I'm glad that they are finally coming up. And everything else in this bed is frost hardy. The stevia might die out when it gets really cold. The parsley might die back, but both of those things will come back from their roots in the spring, so it's not really that big of a deal. And now I'm going to show you the brand new section that I have put in. It's not going to look very impressive yet, but it will eventually, and hopefully you can see the potential in it like I can. So the shadow of the house actually makes it really hard to tell, but there is right here and along here, this is a huge amount of compost covered in mulch, and this is where my berry bushes have been planted. So along here I have the Sweetheart blueberry, this is Sunshine O'Neill, and Misty blueberry. These are from Stark Brothers, by the way. I have a single strawberry plant right here that I'm kind of hoping will multiply and spread out along the ground under where the berry bushes are and act as sort of an edible ground cover. I have 1, 2, 3 blackberry bushes. These are Traveler Primo Cane blackberry. They are supposed to be thornless. And lastly, you can barely see, I have 1, 2, 3 raspberry bushes. These are not from Stark Brothers. I got these on Amazon. These are Thornless Raspberries. And Stark Brothers was just out, which is why I had to go with these. These are the only ones that I got bare root, and I put them in pots, had them sprouting for a while before I transplanted them. But the company I got them from was really great about giving me the right instructions for these. And so, like I said, this is pretty thick on top of the grass here. I covered it with cardboard for quite a while. I'm sure you saw that. And then I added a lot of compost and then another layer of mulch. And so this should keep them in good nutrition as well as good moisture for a very long time, as well as keeping the weeds back from them. I am honestly so excited. I know it will be a while, but my vision for this space is for it to be sort of a little, not so much a privacy hedge, but sort of like a separator of the yards, because right now these two yards really run together, and I think it'll be really nice to make like a cute little corner in the yard, just as well as have this beautiful landscaping element that is also edible. I think it's going to be a lot of work to prune, especially once it gets bigger, but right now all I have to do is watch it be tiny and get bigger in the spring. I'm thinking right now all of these plants are going to go dormant, so I'm not expecting that much growth, if any, in the time between now and when it starts warming up again. I really hope that you guys find this inspiring, that I'm able to do this. It's not a tiny space that I have, but I do have just a regular yard. You know, I'm not living on a farm. I am not working with a ton of land here, and I'm really trying to make the most of it all. And I am so glad that you guys are here to watch me try and go on this journey, and I'm so excited to see how much more I can do with this space, because I have like all of this space here that's still just grass that I have plans for eventually, and we'll see how much food I can actually grow in my yard. It's gonna be neat. So if you guys haven't already, please like and subscribe. I put out garden tours every single Wednesday from now until there's nothing else to show you, I suppose. I'm gonna have to figure out when to restart the count, because we're at 23 now, maybe at the new year. Anyways, thank you guys for your kind comments and for your support, and I can't wait to see you next week. But until then, happy gardening. Kata, what you doing? Oh, pretty girl. What's that?